But what nobody in that classroom realized was that this moment of pure humiliation would become the catalyst for something extraordinary. Because sometimes, the cruelest jokes hide the deepest truths. And this is the story of what happened when one boy's confession became his greatest power. Marcus Chen had perfected the art of disappearing. Not literally, of course. His body showed up to Lincoln High School every single day at 7:45 a.m. without fail. He sat in the same desk in the back row of homeroom, third seat from the window, where the afternoon light would eventually cast his shadow across the worn laminate surface. He ate lunch in the cafeteria, always at the same table in the corner near the kitchen, where the noise was loudest and conversations were hardest to hear. He walked the hallways like every other sophomore, navigating the crowded corridors between classes with practiced efficiency, keeping his head down, his backpack straps tight against his shoulders, his eyes focused on the floor tiles ahead of him. But invisibility isn't about your physical presence. It's about being forgotten the moment you leave the room. It's about existing in a space where nobody really sees you, even when you're standing right in front of them. And Marcus had mastered it to an art form. His father was Steve Harvey, the Steve Harvey. The guy with the talk show that millions of people watched every single day at 3 p.m. on syndicated television. The guy whose face was on billboards in Times Square and along the highways of major cities across America. The guy whose voice echoed through living rooms, break rooms, waiting rooms, and doctors' offices across the entire nation. The guy who was recognized everywhere he went, who couldn't walk through an airport without being stopped by fans, who had built an empire on charm and authenticity, and the ability to connect with people on a level that most humans could only dream of. But at Lincoln High School, Marcus Chen was just nobody. He was the kid that teachers had to look at their attendance sheets to remember. He was the student that sat next to you in class for an entire semester and you'd forget his name by the time summer break rolled around. It wasn't an accident. Nothing about Marcus's invisibility was accidental. Marcus had made a very conscious, very deliberate decision back in 9th grade that keeping his father's identity secret was the only way to survive high school without losing his mind. Because he'd seen what happened to other kids with famous parents. They became targets. Not in a malicious way, necessarily, but in a way that was equally suffocating. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be their friend. Suddenly, they were interesting not because of who they were as individual human beings, but because of who their parents were. Their worth became tied to their family connection rather than their own personality, talents, or character, and Marcus couldn't stand the thought of that happening to him. The idea of people liking him for his father instead of for him was absolutely unbearable. So he lied. Not with explicit words, he just omitted the truth. When kids asked what his dad did for a living, he'd say something deliberately vague and uninteresting. He works in entertainment. When they pressed for details, wanting more specifics, he'd change the subject with practiced ease, asking them about their weekend or their favorite TV show. When they asked about his last name, he'd explain that Chen was incredibly common in Chinese culture, that it was basically the equivalent of Smith or Johnson in America, nothing special or noteworthy about it. None of it was technically false or dishonest. He wasn't making things up or creating elaborate cover stories. But it was all strategically incomplete. It was truth by omission, which was perhaps the most effective form of deception because it didn't technically violate his own moral code. The weight of that secret, though, that was absolutely real. Every single day, Marcus carried it like a stone in his chest, pressing down on his lungs, making it harder to breathe. He'd watch his classmates talk about their boring, ordinary parents with a kind of casual dismissal that only teenagers could manage. Sarah's mom was an accountant who worked in a downtown office building and came home tired every evening. Jake's dad was a dentist who spent his days looking into people's mouths and lecturing them about flossing. Kevin's parents were both teachers at different schools. And Marcus would nod along, pretending his life was equally unremarkable and ordinary. He'd offer sympathetic comments about how boring their parents' jobs sounded. He'd commiserate about having to attend their parents' work events or holiday parties. But inside, he was burning with the knowledge of this massive, monumental truth that could change everything in an instant if he ever decided to let it out. Sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, he'd imagine what would happen if people found out. Would they suddenly want to be his friends, clustering around him like he was the coolest person in school? Would they ask him for autographs from his dad, or selfies, or introductions? Would they treat him differently? Better or worse, he didn't even know which would be worse. Would his entire social structure collapse? Or would it somehow improve? The uncertainty was absolutely suffocating, paralyzing him with indecision. The thing that made it worse, so much worse, was that Marcus actually wanted to talk about his dad. He wanted to tell people about the time Steve Harvey took him backstage at the talk show, showing him the behind-the-scenes machinery of television production, introducing him to crew members and producers, letting him sit in the control room and watch the magic happen in real time. He wanted to describe the surreal, almost dreamlike experience of watching his father interview major celebrities, actors, musicians, politicians, athletes, while he sat in the green room eating unlimited craft services snacks and watching it all unfold on monitors. He wanted to share the funny stories, like the time his dad accidentally called him by the wrong name on live television, mixing up his words mid-sentence, and the whole audience laughed. And later that night at home, they laughed about it together over dinner, his dad doing impressions of his own confused face. He wanted to talk about how his dad was actually a genuinely good person, not just a persona or a character. He wanted people to know that Steve Harvey cared deeply about his family, that he asked real questions and listened to the answers, that he was involved and present and actually interested in his son's life, in a way that many famous parents weren't. But he couldn't. Because the moment he said those words out loud, everything would change. The careful balance he'd constructed would collapse. His invisible life would become visible, and he had no idea how to handle that transformation. So Marcus stayed invisible. He got decent grades, not outstanding enough to draw attention from teachers or get him nominated for academic honors, not bad enough to trigger parent-teacher conferences or put him on academic probation. He joined the chess club because nobody cool was in chess club, which meant it was a safe space where nobody would ask him invasive questions about his personal life. He ate lunch with two other guys, Tyler and Derek, who were equally invisible and equally unbothered by their social status. They didn't ask a lot of questions about his personal life or his family background. They just existed together in comfortable silence. Three invisible boys in a sea of more visible, more interesting teenagers. This was his safe zone. This was where he could breathe. But by sophomore year, as the months accumulated into a full year of secrecy, the weight of the secret was becoming genuinely unbearable. Marcus was 15 years old, caught between childhood and adulthood, and he was living a double life that was slowly eating him alive from the inside out, like a cancer that nobody else could see. At home, he was Marcus Chen, son of Steve Harvey. He'd come home from school and his dad would ask about his day in genuine detail. Not the surface level, how was school, that most parents asked, but real questions about what he was learning, who he was sitting with at lunch, whether there was any drama with classmates. They'd talk about what was happening at school, what teachers were like, whether he was making friends, whether he was happy. His father, despite being one of the most famous men in America, despite having a schedule that would make most people's heads spin, was genuinely, authentically interested in his son's life. He'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and listen while Marcus complained about homework or drama with classmates or the stress of trying to maintain his invisibility. And Marcus loved those moments more than anything. Those were the moments when he felt like his life actually meant something, when he could be fully himself without pretending. But then he'd go back to school the next day and become someone else entirely. He'd transform back into the invisible boy, the forgettable sophomore, the kid nobody really knew or cared about. The cognitive dissonance was brutal and relentless. Marcus would sit in class and listen to kids talk about how cool it would be to have a famous parent, how amazing that would be, how they'd never keep that secret. And he'd think, I literally have that. I could end this right now. I could tell you the truth, and your minds would be absolutely blown. You have no idea what you're saying. But he never did, because the fear was stronger than the desire to share. The fear was all-consuming. What if they thought he was bragging or making it up? What if they didn't believe him and thought he was delusional? What if they believed him, and suddenly his entire carefully constructed social structure collapsed overnight? What if his dad got annoyed that Marcus had told people that he'd violated some kind of privacy agreement they'd never explicitly discussed? What if people started treating him differently and he discovered he couldn't handle it? What if? The what-ifs were endless, multiplying like rabbits, breeding anxiety that kept him up at night. By the middle of sophomore year, Marcus was starting to crack under the relentless pressure. He'd catch himself almost telling people, the words rising in his throat like bile. In English class, when they were reading about famous authors and their lives, he'd almost mentioned that his dad had interviewed famous authors on his show, that he'd met some of them personally. At lunch, when kids were talking about TV shows they watched, he'd almost say something about being on a TV set, about understanding how television production actually worked. In the hallway, when someone would ask what his parents did, he'd almost just tell them the truth and be done with it. But every single time, he'd catch himself mid-thought and swallow the words back down, forcing them back into the locked box where he kept his secrets. It was like holding his breath underwater for hours at a time, day after day, week after week, month after month. The isolation was getting progressively worse. Marcus realized that his friendships with Tyler and Derek, while genuine and comfortable, were fundamentally shallow. Not because they weren't good guys or because he didn't like them, but because he couldn't be fully himself around them. He was always performing a version of himself that was slightly less interesting, slightly less connected, slightly less alive than who he actually was. He was editing himself in real time, filtering his thoughts, keeping the most important parts of his identity locked away, where nobody could access them. And the worst part? Nobody even knew what they were missing. His classmates had no idea that the quiet kid in the back of the class could have told them incredible stories about the entertainment industry. They didn't know that the forgettable sophomore sitting next to them in algebra had insider knowledge about how television worked, about what it was like to be around famous people, about the behind-the-scenes reality of show business. They didn't know that Marcus had met celebrities, that he'd been backstage at major events, that his life was actually pretty extraordinary if he'd just been allowed to talk about it, if he'd just been brave enough to share it. But he wasn't allowed. Not by anyone except himself. He was his own jailer, and he was serving a life sentence. The secret had become a prison, and Marcus was simultaneously the prisoner and the guard, the victim and the perpetrator of his own isolation. He'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling of his bedroom, and think obsessively about what would happen if he just told someone. Not everyone, Just one person. What if he told Tyler or Derek? What if he tested the waters with a close friend and saw how they reacted? What if he took the risk and discovered that it wasn't as catastrophic as he'd imagined? But the fear always won. It always did. Fear that they'd tell everyone immediately, spreading the news like wildfire through the school. Fear that people would treat him differently, either putting him on a pedestal or resenting him for not telling them sooner. Fear that his carefully constructed invisible life would shatter into 1,000 pieces, and he wouldn't be able to handle the aftermath. Fear that he wouldn't be able to live up to people's expectations. Fear that his worth would become tied to his father's fame instead of his own identity. Fear upon fear upon fear, stacking up like bricks, building a wall that he couldn't climb over. So he stayed silent. Day after day, week after week, month after month, he stayed silent. And as the weeks turned into months and the months turned into a full year, that silence became heavier and heavier, more unbearable with each passing day. Marcus felt like he was drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people every single day, in crowded hallways and busy classrooms and the cafeteria full of noise, but completely and utterly alone with his secret. Nobody knew the real him. Nobody could possibly understand what he was carrying. He had no idea that everything was about to change. He had no idea that the weight of this secret was about to become completely unbearable, that he was reaching a breaking point he couldn't recover from. He had no idea that he was about to make a decision, a single, impulsive decision, that would shatter his invisible existence and thrust him into a spotlight he'd spent years trying desperately to avoid. But the cracks were already forming in the foundation of his carefully constructed life, and they were about to break wide open. The moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, unremarkable in every way except for the fact that it would change everything. Marcus was sitting in his AP English class, third period, listening to Mrs. Patterson drone on about the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. She was talking about how Gatsby's obsession with Daisy represented the corruption of the American dream, how the green light symbolized unattainable desires, how Fitzgerald was really making a commentary about the emptiness of wealth and status. It was the kind of literary analysis that Marcus had heard 1,000 times before, the kind that felt performative and disconnected from actual human experience. But then Mrs. Patterson said something that caught his attention. "Sometimes," she said, leaning against her desk with her arms crossed, "we become so obsessed with maintaining an image or a secret that we lose sight of who we actually are. We become prisoners of our own deception. And the tragedy is that nobody around us even knows we're suffering." Marcus felt his stomach drop. It was like she was talking directly to him, like she'd somehow peered into his mind and extracted the exact thoughts he'd been having for the past year. He looked up from his notebook, where he'd been pretending to take notes, and found Mrs. Patterson staring directly at him. Not in an accusatory way, more like she was just making eye contact with the class. But it felt intensely personal. He quickly looked back down. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Marcus couldn't focus on anything Mrs. Patterson was saying. His mind was spinning, caught in a loop of anxiety and self-awareness. Was it that obvious? Could everyone tell that he was hiding something? Was his invisibility actually just a sign that something was fundamentally wrong with him? When the bell rang, he gathered his things quickly and headed for the door, eager to escape the classroom and the weight of Mrs. Patterson's words. But as he was leaving, she called out to him, "Marcus, can I talk to you for a second?" His heart stopped. This was it. This was the moment where everything fell apart. Somehow, Mrs. Patterson knew. She was going to confront him about his secret. and then she'd probably call his parents. And then the whole school would find out, and his life would be over. He walked back to her desk, trying to keep his expression neutral, trying not to look as terrified as he felt. "I wanted to check in with you," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice gentle. "I've noticed you're a really thoughtful student, and you always turn in excellent work. But I also noticed that you don't participate much in class discussions. You seem kind of isolated, I guess? Is everything okay?" Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by a new kind of anxiety. She wasn't accusing him of anything. She was just concerned. Which was somehow worse, because it meant his suffering was visible to other people, that his carefully constructed invisibility wasn't actually working the way he thought it was. "I'm fine," he said automatically, the lie coming as easily as breathing. "I just prefer to listen rather than talk." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, like she didn't quite believe him, but wasn't going to push. "Okay. Well, if you ever want to talk about anything, not just school stuff, but anything, my door is always open. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone outside of your immediate circle." Marcus nodded and excused himself, heading out into the hallway before she could say anything else. The rest of the day was torture. He couldn't stop thinking about what Mrs. Patterson had said, both in class and in their private conversation. The idea that his isolation was visible to teachers, that people could sense something was wrong even if they didn't know what it was. That terrified him more than the secret itself. By the time lunch rolled around, Marcus felt like he was vibrating with anxiety. He sat down at his usual table with Tyler and Derek, but he couldn't eat. His food sat in front of him, untouched, while his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. "Dude, are you okay?" Tyler asked, noticing that Marcus hadn't touched his pizza. "You look like you're about to throw up." "I'm fine," Marcus said, which was becoming his default response to everything. "Just not hungry." Derek, who was less perceptive than Tyler, didn't seem to notice anything was wrong. He was too busy talking about the soccer game coming up that Friday. But Tyler kept glancing at Marcus with concern, like he was trying to figure out what was going on. "You sure?" Tyler pressed. "You've been acting weird all week." Marcus felt something inside him crack. The pressure had been building for so long. And suddenly, sitting there at that lunch table, he felt like he was about to explode. He wanted to tell Tyler everything. He wanted to let it all out, the secret, the weight, the exhaustion of maintaining this double life. He wanted to see what would happen if he just told the truth. His mouth opened. The words were right there, on the tip of his tongue. "My dad is Steve Harvey." 4 simple words. That's all it would take. But before he could say anything, Derek interrupted him, launching into a detailed story about something that had happened in his physics class. The moment passed. The words retreated back into the locked box where they belonged. And Marcus closed his mouth and went back to pretending everything was fine. But something had shifted. The moment he'd almost told Tyler, something inside him had changed. He'd gotten a glimpse of what it would be like to actually share his secret. And part of him desperately wanted to take that step. The rest of the day dragged on. In his afternoon classes, Marcus found himself thinking about what would happen if he actually told someone. Would it really be that bad? Would Tyler actually care that much? Or would he just accept it and move on? Would his life really fall apart? Or was he just catastrophizing? By the time he got home that afternoon, Marcus was mentally and emotionally exhausted. He dropped his backpack by the door and headed to the kitchen, where his dad was already home, working on something on his laptop at the kitchen table. "Hey, buddy," Steve said, looking up with a smile. "How was school?" And that's when it happened. Marcus opened his mouth, and instead of giving his usual vague response about school being fine, he said, "Dad, I almost told someone about you today." Steve looked up from his laptop, his expression shifting from casual interest to genuine concern. "What do you mean?" "In class," Marcus said, sitting down across from his father. "My English teacher was talking about how people become prisoners of their own secrets, and I almost told my friend. I wanted to. I was so close." Steve closed his laptop and gave Marcus his full attention. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "Part of me wants to tell people. Part of me is terrified of what will happen if I do. And I don't know which feeling is stronger anymore." Steve was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, I never asked you to keep this secret, right? This was your choice. And if you want to tell people, that's your choice too." "But what if they treat me differently?" Marcus asked. "What if they suddenly want to be my friend because of you, not because of me?" "Then you'll learn something important about who your real friends are," Steve said simply. "And maybe that's not the worst thing in the world." Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes. He'd been holding this in for so long, and now that he was finally talking about it, the emotional dam was breaking. "I'm tired of lying," he said quietly. "I'm tired of pretending my life is boring. I'm tired of being invisible." Steve reached across the table and took his son's hand. "Then maybe it's time to stop." That night, Marcus lay in bed thinking about what his father had said. Maybe it really was time to stop. Maybe the weight of the secret had become heavier than any potential consequences of revealing it. Maybe invisibility wasn't actually protection. Maybe it was just another form of prison. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to break free. He didn't know exactly how he was going to do it yet. He didn't know when or how the truth would come out. But he knew that something was about to change. The cracks in his carefully constructed life were spreading, and soon the whole thing would come crashing down. He just had no idea how spectacular that crash was going to be. The decision came to Marcus on Wednesday morning, fully formed, like it had been waiting in his subconscious the entire night. He was going to tell Tyler. Today. Not Derek. Tyler was the more emotionally intelligent of the two, the one who actually paid attention when people were struggling. Tyler was the kind of friend who would understand the weight of what Marcus had been carrying, who wouldn't immediately broadcast it to the entire school. And more importantly, Tyler was the one who'd noticed something was wrong, who'd asked if he was okay, who'd shown genuine concern. If Marcus was going to take this leap, Tyler deserved to be the first person to know. The problem was figuring out how to actually do it. He couldn't just blurt it out at lunch like he'd almost done yesterday. That felt too casual, too random. He needed to set the stage, to explain the context, to make sure Tyler understood why he'd kept this secret for so long. Otherwise, it would just seem like Marcus was bragging or making something up. So he texted Tyler during second period. "Can we hang out after school? I need to talk to you about something." The response came back almost immediately. "Yeah, sure. Everything okay?" Marcus stared at those 4 words for a long moment. Was everything okay? He was about to blow up his entire high school experience by revealing a secret he'd been keeping for over a year. He was about to transform from invisible to potentially the most interesting person in his grade. He was about to take a risk that could either be the best decision he'd ever made or the worst. So no, everything wasn't okay. But it was about to be. He texted back, "Yeah, just need to talk. Meet at the park after school? Cool. See you then." The rest of the day passed in a strange haze. Marcus went through his classes on autopilot, not really absorbing anything that his teachers were saying. His mind was entirely focused on the conversation he was about to have. He kept rehearsing what he was going to say, imagining different ways Tyler might react, preparing himself for every possible outcome. What if Tyler didn't believe him? What if he thought Marcus was lying or making it up? What if he laughed at him? What if he told everyone immediately and Marcus's secret became public knowledge before he was ready? But underneath all the anxiety was something else. Something that felt almost like relief. The idea of finally telling someone, of finally sharing this burden with another person, was intoxicating. He was so tired of carrying this alone. When the final bell rang at 3:15 p.m., Marcus grabbed his backpack and headed to the park near school. It was a small park, nothing fancy, just a few trees, some benches, a basketball court that nobody really used. He found Tyler already there, sitting on one of the benches near the playground, tossing a tennis ball up in the air and catching it repeatedly. "Hey," Tyler said, looking up as Marcus approached. "What's up? You seem stressed." Marcus sat down on the bench next to him, his heart pounding so hard he was pretty sure Tyler could hear it. This was it. This was the moment. He took a deep breath and said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen without interrupting until I'm done. Okay?" Tyler's expression shifted to concern. He set down the tennis ball and gave Marcus his full attention. "Okay, what's going on?" "I've been keeping a secret from basically everyone at school for the past year and a half," Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly. "And it's been eating me alive. I'm tired of lying, and I trust you, so I'm going to tell you the truth." He paused, gathering his courage. Tyler was waiting, his eyes wide, clearly bracing himself for something serious. "My dad is Steve Harvey," Marcus said quietly. For a moment, Tyler didn't say anything. He just stared at Marcus, processing the information. Then he said, "Like, the Steve Harvey? The talk show guy?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "That's Steve Harvey." Tyler blinked. Then he laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but a genuine laugh of surprise and disbelief. "Okay, so either you're messing with me right now, or this is the craziest thing I've ever heard." "I'm not messing with you," Marcus said. "I know it sounds insane. Trust me, I know how it sounds. But it's the truth." Tyler was quiet for a long moment, the smile fading from his face as he realized Marcus was serious. "Wait, you're actually telling the truth right now?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "I've been keeping this secret since freshman year because I didn't want people to treat me differently. I didn't want to be interesting just because of my dad. I wanted people to like me for me. But the secret has just been... It's been too much. It's been eating me alive." Tyler stood up and started pacing, processing what he'd just heard. "Okay, so your last name is Chen because your mom is Chinese?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "My dad's last name is Harvey. My mom's last name was Chen before she married him. I go by Chen because it's less recognizable." "That's..." Tyler paused, searching for words. "That's actually kind of genius, and also kind of insane. Why didn't you just tell me before?" "Because I was scared," Marcus said. "I was scared of how you'd react. I was scared you'd tell everyone. I was scared everything would change." Tyler sat back down on the bench, shaking his head in disbelief. "Everything's going to change now that you've told me. You know that, right? Like, this is huge. This is the biggest secret in the entire school. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Are you going to tell people? No, Tyler said immediately. No, I'm not going to tell anyone. This is your secret to share, not mine. But Marcus, you understand that once people find out, and they will find out eventually, everything is going to be different, right? Yeah, Marcus said. I know, but I'm okay with that now. I'm tired of being invisible. Tyler looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled Marcus into a hug. That's a lot of weight to carry around, man. I'm glad you told me, and I'm here for whatever happens next. Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes. This was what he'd needed. Just one person to know, to understand, to accept the truth without judgment. It felt like a weight had been lifted off his chest, like he could finally breathe properly for the first time in over a year. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. For what? Tyler asked, pulling back from the hug. For believing me? For not freaking out? For just being cool about it? Are you kidding? Tyler said, sitting back down. This is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm friends with the son of Steve Harvey. That's insane. Marcus laughed despite himself. See, this is why I didn't want to tell people. I didn't want to be interesting just because of my dad. Yeah, but you're not, Tyler said. You're interesting because you've been carrying around this massive secret for over a year, and you've been dealing with it basically alone. That takes guts, man. That's interesting, regardless of who your dad is. They sat there on the bench for another hour, talking about everything. Marcus told Tyler about his experiences on the talk show set, about meeting celebrities, about the surreal experience of having a famous father. And Tyler asked a million questions, his curiosity seemingly endless. But what struck Marcus most was that Tyler wasn't treating him differently because of his dad. He was treating him with respect because of how Marcus had handled the situation, because of his honesty, because of his willingness to be vulnerable. By the time they left the park, Marcus felt lighter than he had in months. One person knew the truth now. One person had accepted it without judgment. And somehow, that made the idea of telling more people feel less terrifying. As he walked home, Marcus realized that the hardest part was over. He'd taken the first step. He'd broken his silence. And the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. But he had no idea that his confession to Tyler was about to set off a chain of events that would transform his high school experience in ways he couldn't even imagine. He had no idea that one conversation in the park would lead to a series of revelations, misunderstandings, and moments that would define the rest of his sophomore year. He just knew that something was changing. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready for it. Marcus had assumed that telling Tyler would be the hard part. He'd thought that once he'd crossed that threshold, everything else would fall into place naturally. He'd imagined that keeping the secret with just one other person would feel manageable, that he and Tyler could share knowing glances across the cafeteria, that they'd have this special bond forged by the weight of the secret they shared together. He was spectacularly wrong. By Friday morning, exactly 2 days after his confession in the park, Marcus realized that Tyler had told someone. He didn't know who, and he didn't know how it had happened, but the evidence was unmistakable. People were looking at him differently. Conversations would stop when he walked by. There were whispers, followed by quick glances in his direction. The invisible boy had suddenly become very visible, and not in a good way. He cornered Tyler at his locker before first period, his voice low and urgent. You told someone. Tyler's face flushed immediately. Marcus, Who? Marcus demanded. Who did you tell? It was Derek, Tyler said quickly. I didn't mean to, I swear. We were hanging out yesterday after school, and he was asking why I was acting weird, and it slipped out. I wasn't thinking. I'm sorry. Marcus felt a wave of betrayal wash over him. Derek. Of all people, Derek was the one who knew. Derek, who was nice enough, but not particularly thoughtful. Who talked a lot and didn't always think before he spoke. Derek, who probably couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it. Did Derek tell anyone else? Marcus asked, already knowing the answer from the way Tyler's expression shifted. I don't know, Tyler said miserably. Maybe. I told him not to say anything, but he's Derek, Marcus finished, and Derek doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. He walked away before Tyler could apologize again, heading to first period with his stomach in knots. The secret that he'd been carrying alone for over a year had been out in the world for less than 48 hours, and it was already spiraling out of his control. By lunch, Marcus had confirmed his suspicions. Somehow, the news had spread through at least half the sophomore class. He could feel the weight of people's stares as he walked through the cafeteria. A group of girls near the salad bar actually gasped when they saw him walk by. Someone called out, "Hey, is it true your dad is Steve Harvey?" from across the room. He didn't respond. He just kept walking to his usual table in the corner, where Tyler and Derek were already sitting, both looking guilty and apologetic. Marcus, I'm so sorry, Derek said immediately. I told like 3 people, and I thought they wouldn't tell anyone else, but apparently they did. And now it's like the whole school knows, and I feel terrible. Marcus sat down without saying anything. He wasn't angry at Derek exactly. Derek was just being Derek, thoughtless and well-meaning, but ultimately irresponsible. He was more angry at himself for thinking he could control how this information spread, for believing that telling one person would somehow keep the secret contained. It's fine, Marcus said, even though it wasn't fine at all. It's not fine, Tyler said. This is our fault. We should have been more careful. It doesn't matter now, Marcus said. He picked at his food, not really eating, just moving it around his plate. The secret's out. There's nothing we can do about it. But that wasn't entirely true. There was one thing he could do. He could get ahead of the narrative. He could control the story before it spiraled into something he didn't recognize. He could tell people the truth on his own terms, rather than letting them speculate and spread rumors. By the end of lunch, Marcus had made a decision. He was going to tell the school, not in some dramatic announcement, but in a real, honest way. He was going to own the secret, rather than letting it own him. That afternoon, he texted his dad. "Can we talk when I get home?" Something happened. His father's response was immediate. "Of course. Everything okay?" Marcus didn't respond. He'd explain everything in person. When he got home, his dad was already there, waiting for him in the kitchen with 2 glasses of lemonade on the table. Steve took one look at Marcus's face and said, "Okay, what happened?" "I told Tyler about you," Marcus said, sitting down across from him. "And Tyler told Derek, and Derek told basically everyone, and now half the school knows." Steve was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he said, "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly," Marcus said, "I feel relieved and terrified, and like I've lost control of the narrative." "So take control back," Steve said simply. "Tell your story. Tell people the truth on your terms. Don't let them decide what your secret means. You decide that." "How?" Marcus asked. Steve leaned back in his chair, thinking. Well, you could do a social media post. You could tell people at school. You could invite some people over and tell them in person. There are a lot of ways to do this. The question is, what feels right to you? Marcus thought about it for a long moment. A social media post felt too impersonal. Telling people at school one by one would take forever and would probably come across as bragging. But inviting people over, having a real conversation, explaining the context and the reasoning behind keeping the secret, that felt like it could work. I want to have people over, Marcus said, like a small group. I want to tell them the truth, and I want to explain why I kept it secret for so long. I want them to understand that this isn't about bragging or showing off. It's just about being honest about who I am. That sounds like a good plan, Steve said. When do you want to do it? Tomorrow, Marcus suggested. Saturday afternoon. We could order pizza, hang out, and I could just tell them. Steve smiled. I like it. And if you want, I could be here. Not to make it about me, but just to be present, to answer questions if people have them. Marcus felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. His dad understood exactly what he needed. Yeah, he said. I think that would help. That night, Marcus created a group chat with about 15 people from school. People he actually liked. People he thought would be cool about the whole thing. He wrote, I have something I want to tell you all in person. Come over to my house tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pizza will be provided. It's important to me that you hear this from me, not from rumors. Hope to see you there. The responses came in almost immediately. People asking what it was about, people confirming they'd be there, people expressing curiosity and confusion. Marcus didn't respond to any of the questions. He just let the mystery sit there, let people speculate, let the anticipation build. That night, he barely slept. He kept imagining different scenarios, different ways the conversation could go. What if people didn't believe him? What if they thought he was making it up for attention? What if they treated him completely differently after this, and he discovered he couldn't handle it? But underneath all the anxiety was something else. Something that felt almost like excitement. For the first time in over a year, he was about to be completely honest about who he was. He was about to stop hiding. He was about to step into the light and see what happened. Saturday morning came slowly. Marcus spent most of it cleaning the house, making sure everything was perfect. His dad ordered pizza from their favorite place. 3 large pepperonis, 1 veggie, 1 with extra cheese. They set up the living room with plenty of seating, arranged the pizza boxes on the coffee table, put out drinks and napkins. By 1:45 p.m., Marcus was a nervous wreck. His hands were shaking. His stomach felt like it was tied in knots. He kept checking his phone, watching as people started arriving. Tyler came first, giving Marcus an encouraging nod. Then Derek, looking nervous and apologetic. Then Sarah from his English class, and Jake from his math class, and a bunch of other people he'd invited. By 2:15 p.m., his living room was full of teenagers, all curious, all wondering what this mysterious gathering was about. Marcus's dad appeared in the doorway, and there was a moment of silence as people recognized him. Then the room erupted in whispers and exclamations. "Oh my God," someone said. "Is that everyone?" Marcus said, raising his voice to get their attention. "Thanks for coming. I know you're probably confused about why I invited you all here. I'm going to explain." He took a deep breath, and then he told them everything. He told them about keeping the secret, about why he'd done it, about the weight of carrying it alone. He told them about his dad being Steve Harvey, about his experiences on the talk show set, about the surreal reality of having a famous parent. And he told them about why he decided to tell them the truth today. Not because he wanted to brag or show off, but because he was tired of hiding, tired of being invisible, tired of pretending his life was boring. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then people started asking questions, lots of questions, about his dad's career, about what it was like being on set, about whether he'd met any famous celebrities. And Marcus answered them all, honestly and openly. His dad chimed in occasionally, telling funny stories, answering questions about the entertainment industry, making the whole thing feel less like an interrogation and more like a genuine conversation. At the end of the afternoon, Marcus realized something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer hiding. He was just himself. And that felt like the most radical, terrifying, liberating thing in the world. As people were leaving, Sarah pulled him aside. "Hey, I'm really glad you told us," she said. "And I'm sorry that Derek blabbed. But I'm glad the truth is out now. You seem a lot happier." Marcus smiled. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." The week that followed Marcus's revelation was a whirlwind. The news spread quickly at Lincoln High, and suddenly, he was the center of attention. Initially, it was exhilarating. Students approached him for selfies and questions, and he was invited to more social events. But with the excitement came anxiety. He worried that people only saw him as Steve Harvey's son, rather than as Marcus. One afternoon, while walking to his locker, Marcus overheard classmates speculating about his father's influence on his opportunities. It made his stomach turn. He didn't want to be seen as benefiting from his dad's fame. Frustrated, he met up with Tyler and Derek after school. "I'm struggling with all this attention," he confessed. "I want to be me, not just Steve Harvey's kid." Derek suggested he run for student council to showcase his own identity. With encouragement from Tyler, Marcus decided to take the leap. During his campaign, he spoke passionately about his vision for the school, emphasizing his desire to be recognized for his own achievements. The day of the election, when his name was announced as a new council member, was a turning point. Cheers erupted, and for the first time, he felt accepted for who he was. Yet, the pressure of being in the limelight persisted. Some students still approached him because of his father, and he had to navigate these interactions carefully. One day, a group asked for his dad's help with a fundraiser, and Marcus firmly redirected them, emphasizing his desire to contribute on his own merit. As time went on, Marcus grew more comfortable asserting his identity. He organized successful activities like a charity fundraiser and made new friends. But he still felt overwhelmed at times. One evening, he spoke with his dad about his feelings. Steve reassured him that it was okay to feel pressure and reminded him that nobody is perfect. "Just keep being honest and true to who you are," he advised. By the end of the school year, Marcus had transformed. He balanced the attention he received while asserting his individuality. He entered an art competition, showcasing his passion and creativity. At the gallery opening, surrounded by friends and family, Marcus reflected on his journey. He was no longer invisible. He was proud of who he was becoming. Marcus Chen, a young man forging his own path,